video. In this video, we will be talking about the chapter of overheads. So this chapter is almost the same as was in the MA1 and MA2 exam, but there are some new topics added in this chapter. So what are the new topics? The new topics are about the methods of reapportionment. So the reapportionment you also did study in your MA1 and MA2 exams, but there are few new methods that has been introduced in your FMA exam. So what are the methods of reapportionment? So there is the first method, which is direct method. When do you use the direct method? So direct method is used when service cost centers only provide service to production cost centers. Okay, so in this case, the overhead that you are sharing from the service cost center, you only share the overhead from service cost center between production cost centers. You do not share the overheads between service cost centers. Okay, so no service cost center get any share of the overhead because no service cost center is working for each other. You can see from this example. So for example, canteen and maintenance, these are your two departments, two service cost centers. So they are not providing services to each other. No one is providing service to anyone between these. Okay, so they are only providing service to production cost centers. So in this case, you will use direct method, and direct method is very easy because you only have to share the service cost center overhead between production cost centers. So now what is the second method of reapportionment? It is step down method. So what happens in step down method when you use the step down method? So step down method is used when service cost centers provide services to other service cost centers and production cost center, but there is no reciprocity between the services provided. What does reciprocity mean? Reciprocity means that services are not provided in you can say in cycle. For example, maintenance department is providing service to canteen, but in return canteen is not providing service to the maintenance department. So if canteen is providing service to maintenance department, then this means this is known as reciprocity. Okay, so services are reciprocated here. When there is no reciprocity, but there is one service cost center that is providing service to other service cost center, but there is no reciprocity, then you use the step down method. Okay, so this is like this case. For example, maintenance is providing service to canteen, but in return canteen is not providing to maintenance department. So in this case, you use the step down method. So what happens in the step down method? Service cost center and production cost center. For service cost center providing service to other service cost centers. So overhead is shared out between service cost center and production cost center, but this is only for those service cost centers that are providing services to other service cost centers. For example, in the case of maintenance department. So maintenance overhead will be shared between canteen and other production cost centers as well. But the canteen overhead will not be shared out to maintenance. It will only be shared to production cost centers. So this is the case in the step down method. Now let's move towards the new method that has been introduced in your F2 exam or the FMA exam. So the first method is repeated distribution method. So when do you use the repeated distribution method? You use the repeated distribution method when there is reciprocity in services provided. Okay, so what is reciprocity? That maintenance is providing service to canteen and canteen is also providing service in return to the maintenance department. This is known as reciprocity. So whenever you see reciprocity in the question, whenever the data indicates that the services are being reciprocated, two services cost center are providing services to each other, then that means you have to use one of the two methods. You can use the repeated distribution method or you can use the algebraic method. So there are two methods to solve reciprocity. One is repeated distribution method and the second one is algebraic method. The most likely method that will be tested in your exam is algebraic method. Okay, so this is much easier than the repeated distribution method. So what do you do under both methods? The overheads are shared out between service cost centers and production cost centers as well. So for example, maintenance overhead will be shared out between canteen and other production cost centers, and canteen overhead will also be shared out between maintenance and production cost centers. Okay, so this is all. We will now move towards attempting a question for the repeated distribution method. Okay, so in the next video we will move towards the calculation of the how to use the algebraic method. Okay, so let's now go towards attempting the question. So here it is the question. In this question we will be attempting all of the methods of reapportionment. We will solve it with the direct method and then step down method and then repeated distribution, and then we will move on towards algebraic method. Okay, so let's start doing it. So a company's overheads have been allocated and apportioned to its 5 cost centers as shown below. So remember the stages of the overhead absorption. The first stage is allocation, second stage is apportionment, third stage is reapportionment, fourth stage is absorption. Okay, so the first 2 stages are completed. The overheads have been allocated and apportioned to the cost centers. Now we are moving towards the reapportionment stage. So this is the data after first 2 stages have been completed. So total allocated and apportioned overheads for each cost center have been given. Production cost center A, production cost center B, production cost center C, production cost center D, service cost center C, service cost center D, service cost center E. Okay, so now we have to, the first part is saying complete the reapportionment stage under direct method using the data below. Okay, so we have to complete the reapportionment stage under direct method. Okay, so let's check the data. So C is the service cost center. Okay, so service cost center C, so it is talking about C. Okay, so C is a service cost center, and the service it is providing is 40% of its services are used by production cost center A. Okay, so I'm repeating, services of service cost center C are 40% consumed by production cost center A, and the remaining 60% are consumed by production cost center B. Similarly, service cost center D's services are 75% used by production cost center A, and the remaining 25% are used by production cost center B. And the E services, so production cost center A, you can also say it like this, that the production cost center A uses 30% of service cost center E's services. Okay, I am repeating, production cost center A uses 30% of E's services. Okay, similarly production cost center B uses 70% of E's services. So of course these E is service cost center C, D and E, they are not being used by any of these service cost center, they are only being used by production cost centers. Okay, so now let's move towards attempting the question under the direct method. Okay, so direct method. So first we will write the cost center's name. So production cost center A, production cost center B, service cost center C, service cost center D, service cost center E. Okay, so these are the cost centers, and now we will write the total allocated and apportioned overhead, the data from the previous stages. Okay, so total allocated and apportioned overhead. So what are these figures? Let's zoom out a bit. We can just copy these figures, I think it will work. Okay. So these are the, let's convert them into currency. So these are the figures from the previous stages. Okay, so now we have to do the reapportionment stage, and we are using the direct method. Okay, so under reapportionment stage, what happens is that we are sharing out the service cost center overhead between production cost centers. Okay, so and the method that we are using is direct method, and so services are not reciprocated, and no service cost center is providing service to any other service cost center. So this means that that all of the service cost center overheads will be shared out between the production cost centers only. So let's take the service cost center C's overhead of $10,000 and let's share this out between production cost center A and production cost center B. So how will we do it? Very easy, very simple. We will just multiply with the percentage. So 10,000 multiplied by 40%. So 40% of C services are consumed by production cost center A. So 40% of total cost in service cost center C of 10,000, 40% is shared out between production cost center A. Okay, so 4,000, and the remaining 6,000 will be shared out between, will be written below the production cost center B. Okay, so now let's move towards the service cost center D. I can just erase it. So you can also write the negative figure here. Okay, so negative. So this means that the service cost center C's overhead have been shared out. Okay, and no share has been given here. No share has been given here. Okay, now let's share out the service cost center D's overhead. So 75% is shared out to production cost center A. So let's calculate 75% of overhead in the service cost center D. So 75% multiplied by 20,000. Okay. Similarly, 25% is shared out to production cost center B. Okay. So I will write minus 20,000 here, and no share has been given here. Okay. So service cost center E. What are the percentages? 30% is used by production cost center A. So 4,000 multiplied by 30%, and the remaining 70% is shared out between, is sent to the production cost center B. Okay. So now let's write the negative figures. So minus 4,000. Okay. So now we will find the reapportionment stage hasn't yet ended. It will end once you find the total figure. So total allocated, apportioned, and reapportioned overhead. Okay. Once you calculate this figure, then only then the reapportionment stage is finished. Okay. So we are calculating the total overhead. Okay. So total overhead is in production cost center A, it is 100,200 now, and in production cost center B it is 113,800. There has been zero overhead now remaining on the service cost center C, because 10,000 has been shared out between production cost centers, and also zero overhead in service cost center D as well, and service cost center E as well. Okay. And now let's total the overheads. So 10,200 plus 113,800, the total is 214,000. So let's add these figures. So the answer here is also 214,000. So after the reapportionment stage, all the overhead has been shared out between production cost centers. Okay. So this was all. This was the direct method. Now let's move towards the step down method. We will do the same question, but this time we will use the step down method. Okay, so under step down method, let's check the data. So the data is complete the reapportionment stage under step down method using the data below. Okay, so look at this data. So C services are being used, 40% of C services are being used by production cost center A. 50% of its services are being used by production cost center B. Now 8% of its services are being used by service cost center D, and 2% of its services are being used by service cost center E. Okay, so there must be no reciprocation here. Okay, so C is providing service to service cost center D and service cost center E also. So this means that D and E must not be providing service to service cost center C. Why? Because if they are providing service to service cost center C also, then it will result in reciprocation. And reciprocation, to solve reciprocation, you cannot use the step down method. Okay, so of course you can check the data here. So D services are not being used by service cost center C, and also E services are not being used by service cost center C. So there is no reciprocation. Okay. And now let's move towards the check the D services. So D services are 75% consumed by production cost center A, 20% consumed by production cost center B, and or just 5% consumed by service cost center E. Okay, so neither of its services consumed by service cost center C and service cost center D. Okay, so D is providing service to E. This means that E must not be providing service to service cost center D. Okay, so because this will result in reciprocation, which cannot be dealt with by a step down method. So you can check the E's data. So there is no, it is not providing service to service cost center C, and not providing services to service cost center D, and neither to service cost center E. of course it cannot provide service to itself. Okay, if there is some service mentioned here that this service cost center is providing service to itself, then you have to ignore it. Okay, you have to ignore self-servicing always. Okay, you have to ignore self-servicing always. Okay, so now let's move towards solving this question. So now one thing to remember in step-down method is that you must start with those service cost centers that are providing services to other service cost centers. So I'm repeating, whenever you are attempting the step-down method, you must start with those cost centers, those service cost centers that are providing services to other cost centers. Okay, so service cost center C is providing services to D and E. That means we will start with service cost center C. Okay, so let's just erase this all. Okay, so service cost center C overhead, we are sharing it now. So 10,000 overhead multiplied by how much is consumed by production cost center A, 40%. So multiply by 40%. Similarly, 10,000 multiplied by how much is consumed by production cost center B, it is 50%. Okay. Similarly, it is not you have to always ignore self-servicing even if it is given. So let's move towards the service cost center D. So 8% and 2%. So 10,000 multiplied by 8% and 10,000 multiplied by 2%. Okay. So we have now shared the service cost center overhead between production cost centers and service cost centers as well, because they are taking service as a you can look from the perspective of service cost center D. So service cost center D is taking service from service cost center C, right? So this means that service cost center C's overhead must be shared out to service cost center D, because this would be fair, right? If you are not sharing, if you are not giving any share to service cost center D, service cost center D, then that means that won't be fair, right? Because service cost center D is using the services from service cost center C. Okay, so this is all. Let's move towards now sharing out to the overhead of service cost center D. So one thing to remember is that you have to find the total before moving to the other cost center. So how will you find the total? Just total for the service cost centers. You can write the minus figure here, minus 10,000. Okay, so now this total overhead in service cost center D is 20,800. This is the overhead that you must share now. Okay, you don't have to share the 20,000 because now the overhead, total overhead in service cost center D is 20,800. So you have to share this now. Okay, so now of course we will do this service cost center D first. Why? Because it is providing service to service cost center E. So we are starting with we always start with those service cost centers that are providing services to other service cost centers. So service cost center D, so which overhead do we have to share? 20,800 multiplied by 75% is consumed by production cost center A. So multiply by 75% equals to this multiplied by how much? 20% is consumed by production cost center B, and 5% is consumed by service cost center E. So 20,800 multiplied by 5%. We can write negative here. Okay, and no share has been given here. So this we have shared out the service cost center D's overhead. Now we will do what? We will do the total. Okay, so let's calculate the total again. Okay, so now the overhead that we must share for the service cost center E is not 4,000. The overhead that we must share to production cost center of service cost center E would be $5,240. So service cost center E overhead that we have to share is $5,240 multiplied by how much percentage? 30% here, and 70% here. Okay, so now we will now calculate the final total. total allocated and apportioned overhead. We can erase this line. So total allocated, apportioned and reapportioned overhead. So for the production cost centers. So 0, 0, 0. Oops. Why it is making mistake? From here in this, for the service cost center, you have to only plus the part which is below the last line. Okay, so below this line. Okay, so now let's calculate the total. So total overhead is 214,000. Okay, so but the sharing has been done differently. So this is the method of reapportionment, the step down method. Okay, so step down method is completed. So I hope it is very much clear. The only part that you have to that the students do forget is finding the total before moving on towards next service cost center. You have to only find the total for service cost centers before moving on towards next service cost center. Okay, so this was all step down method. Now let's move towards the final method of reapportionment, which is repeated distribution method. So it is like the step down method but a bit different, a bit more lengthy, I would say. So repeated distribution method. So repeated distribution method is used when the repeated distribution method is used. Repeated distribution method is used when there is reciprocity. So let's check for the reciprocity. So service cost center C services is 40% used by production cost center A, 50% used by production cost center B, and 10% are used by service cost center D. Okay, so let's check the D's data. These services are also used by C. Okay, so there is now reciprocity being happening here. Okay, so C services are consumed by service cost center D, and D's services are consumed by service cost center C. Okay, so reciprocity is being done here. So that is why we are using the repeated distribution method. So now from what cost center should we start? We could start from anywhere, it doesn't matter. But yeah, it doesn't matter really. You can start from anywhere. So we can start with service cost center C. So we will just share in the order, just like the way that we have been sharing about. So 10,000 multiplied by 40% here, and then 10,000 multiplied by 50% for production cost center B, 50%, and then here we will write the negative figure, and then for the service cost center B, service cost center D, 10%. So 10,000 multiplied by 10%. Okay, and here there is no overhead shared out to service cost center E. Okay, so we can also there is a quick check. You can just add these all figures and the answer must come to 0. Okay, so if the answer is not coming to 0, then this means that you have done something wrong. Okay, and so now of course, before moving towards the next service cost center, we must again find the total, just like in the step down method. So total, and the total for what? Only for the service cost centers. So okay, now the total overhead in service cost center D is 21,000. Now let's do the service cost center D. So we will just share in this order, multiply by 75%, 75% multiplied by 21,000. Okay, and 21,000 multiplied by 20%. And now the problem begins. What is the problem? That service cost center DC, service cost center C's overhead we already shared, but now we will again be sharing out overhead of service cost center D to service cost center C. So there will be new overhead shared out to service cost center C. Okay, so 21,000 multiplied by how much is it? 5%. So multiply by 5%. So 1,000 extra overhead has been shared out to service cost center C. This means we have to now again share this $1,050 towards production cost center A, production cost center B, and service cost center D. Okay, so we will write in minus this figure here, and no overhead has been shared out to service cost center D. We will again find the total. So this total step is very important. This if you are doing this step, if you are adding the line of total, then this significantly reduces your chances of making an error in the calculation. Okay. So now we will again move towards service cost center C and share the 1050 overhead that has been shared from the service cost center D. So 1050 multiplied by 40% and 1050 multiplied by 50% and then minus 1050 and here 1050 multiplied by 10%. Okay, so again service cost center D's overhead was completely shared out and the answer was the remaining overhead was coming to 0, but again we have shared out 105 worth of overheads to service cost center D. Now we will again move towards sharing out the service cost center D's overhead of 105 that we just shared out. Okay, so here is no overhead. Now we will find the total again. Okay, so we will move towards service cost center D again. When will we stop? We will stop soon, you will see. Okay, so 105 multiplied by service production cost center A. So we are sharing service cost center D, so we have to look at this data. So it's multiplied by 75%, and then 105 multiplied by 20%, and then 105 multiplied by 5%. Okay, and then here minus 105 and here no overhead. Okay, we will again find the total now. So the total is 0 plus this $5 and here 0 4,000. Okay, so now again we have got overhead of $5 to service cost center C. So we will share now this one. Now this is the last time we are sharing. Okay, it cannot get longer than this. Okay, because $5 if we are sharing out, then the answer will get into points. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you can ignore the points. Okay, you can round up the figures, round up here or round down. What depends on what is suitable. Okay, so $5 multiplied by 40%. And then $5 multiplied by 50%. Okay, so now no need to share the cost here. Okay, why? Because the difference is just very minor, maybe around, let's check, 5 minus this, so just 0.28, so you can ignore it. Okay, so minus 5 and 0. Okay, now again total. Okay, so now we will move finally towards the service cost center D. So 4,000 worth of overhead we have to share out between production cost centers, 30% to air and 70% to production cost center B. Okay, so now finally we are now calculating total, apportion, allocated, apportion and re-apportion overhead. Okay, let me zoom out so you can see all the workings. So I can remove this line. So we will find the total. We will add all these figures to find the total overhead for production cost center A plus this, and we can find here also. So minus 4,000. Okay, 0. Oops. we have to for this service cost center we have to only add from this line below, okay, below this line. Okay. So let's check if we have calculated, we have done the calculation right. So we will plus these figures, and these are coming to $214,000, which was our original overhead. Okay, so $1 difference, it is a minor difference, it doesn't matter, you can ignore this difference. Okay, so this was all, this was the repeated distribution method. So of course this is very lengthy to solve the repeated distribution method. To do the repeated distribution method, it takes so much time. So of course it won't be tested completely in the exam, but some part of it can be tested. Okay, so for example, a table has to for example, a table is given and some figure is missing, and you have to calculate that figure. So this could be the way that this topic could be tested. So the examiner could find some way to test this topic, but of course you won't be required to do the complete question because it becomes so lengthy. Okay, so this is the answer for this question. So you see there was reciprocity, but we still managed to solve it. We still managed to get the total overhead between production cost centers, okay, which is the main objective of reapportionment stage. So this was all. We will meet in the next video. Bye.